I'm gonna start letting people in now. Wait, is Christy back yet?
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay, good. Could you make the presentation full screen?
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, great. I'm gonna start letting people in now. Give them like 2 minutes, and then we'll start the session.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our session today. So to start off, I'm just going to give a couple of Zoom reminders. So please, if you experience any Zoom technical issues, call 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. Your audio will be connected through your computer or through a call-in number. If at any point you experience any problems with your audio, just let me know in the chat box and I can call you in. Please submit your questions at any time during the presentation to the chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you are called upon to ask your question in person, please turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And then when you are finished, please turn off your camera again and mute yourself as well. The recording of this session, the slides, and the session summaries will be posted shortly on our website, thefdp.org. So now I'm going to pass it off to Christy Keene to start the presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to the May 2022 Finance Audit and Costing session. My name is Christy Keene. I'm the Assistant Director for Post-Award Support Services at the University of Chicago. I will be joined shortly today by Michelle Bowles from the NIH Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. I also want to give my thanks to Cindy Hope from Georgia Tech, who is still very much an instrumental member of this team. You may remember from our January meeting that Cindy is still in her finance audit and costing co-chair role, but on an interim basis. So going forward, you'll likely hear from me a bit more than Cindy. So thank you, Cindy, for all of your guidance. I much appreciate it. So today we will hear about the work that the Data Sharing and Management Working Group has been participating in, and along with that, some other kind of open item updates that Finance Audit and Costing has been working on. Additionally, you will hear from Michelle Bowles. I think we'll kind of shift that to the end of the session today. And I also want to kind of give you an orientation to some of the acronyms you might hear today. We, as you know, live in a world of acronyms, but I want to be mindful of the audience that we have today. And so thank you all for joining. And I think now I will hand it off to Judith Ryan from Harvard, although it says Michelle, we're going to skip ahead and we'll catch Michelle at the end of the session today. So with that, I will hand it off to Judith Ryan from Harvard for an update on the data sharing and management working group that has launched since the January meeting and is actively working on implementing, giving you guidance to implement the NIH policy in January of 2023. So take it away, Judy.
So I can comment on the working group that's related to exploring costing solutions. Is that what you mean, Christy? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is a slide that shows who the leadership on this is. Zach Chandler and I don't know if Zach is on the call or not, but we were asked to kind of become involved in this topic. This is the team that's working, that is the working group. Next slide, please. This is the broader working group. These are people who have expressed interest in working with the working group to really identify the issues and move things forward to some kind of a costing solution or a costing understanding. You can see that the asterisk indicates a faculty member. This group has not, just to be clear, this group hasn't really convened yet as a group yet to start the work. But these are people who self-identified as interested in working together. So the next slide. So the first thing we did was we realized that there are two important kind of bodies of knowledge that people need to bring to this project. And the first is understanding the fundamentals of costing as it lives in the sponsored world. And then also, what are the data management realities that we are trying to figure out how to cost? So the first step was to bring the right people together. And as I just described, that's underway. The second part was to recognize that these two groups would have difference or disparities in foundational knowledge in each of these areas. So the people who know something about costing need to learn some things about data management, and vice versa. The people that know a lot about the data management side need to understand what some of the structures are that are limitations for costing. And we're not saying that no one has that. It's just that we should create some common understanding about what the definitions are. And on the costing side, we specifically identified that if you go from direct cost through this kind of costing possibility range, you end up on one end with direct cost all the way up through indirect cost. So we wanted to make sure people understand what those different buckets of costs are and the implications of choosing one type of costing mechanism over another. And the same goes for the data sharing and management part, where we're developing the foundational knowledge so that we understand when someone talks about data sets, or the costing person hears a data management person talk about data sets, they understand what that means, the different types of storage, how access and security are sometimes diametrically opposed. And then, of course, the important elements of curation and plan monitoring and all the other things that we're trying to learn about. Next slide, please. So we are hoping that this group might be able to, after we've established the foundational knowledge and shared it, distributed it, and we can all talk to each other in meaningful ways, we're hoping that we can model a couple of costing solutions using the worksheet that Jim Luther helpfully provided previously, which is included in the slide deck. We've included it just in case people need to remember what that looks like. But we're hoping that that life cycle worksheet can create a forum for us to have these discussions about, here's the type of cost, what do we think the costing solution should be for that? And then, of course, after we have this theoretical discussion about what the costing solutions might be, we have to really understand what are the practical implications of the suggestions. Will these models work? Are they too expensive? Are they too hard to implement? Are they impractical for different types of institutions? So after we come up with some ideas about what the costing might be, we need to think about whether those ideas will work or not. And we also need to spend a little bit of time of figuring out what it is we really want the output of this working group to be. Do we want to say that, do we want to make a recommendation for a costing model? Do we want to articulate a concern to the government that we would like the government to address specifically? For instance, a lot of these costs right now live under the administrative portion of the FNA rate. Do we need to try to think about going back to OMB for a relief from the 26% cap, which of course would be a very radical recreation of the FNA process? And then maybe we also need to think about whether there's now a third component of F&A. It's not just a facilities or an administrative expense. And then we need some clarity about actually if we go the direct cost method or a route, we need to understand what's the allowability of storage costs after closeout. And then what do we do about this tension between open access and security that where we all live? Those are just some of the questions, but we do really want to understand. We do believe that it's part of the working group's work to determine what our most useful outcome of the working group would be. We also imagine that we might be able to provide some resources like budget calculators or estimates or ways to think about costing out some of these things, in addition to just saying how to cost them, but actually how to develop a budget if you're to figure out how much does FSMA cost, for example. And then we're hoping that we will have that part, that some of the deliverables would be able to be done by the beginning of July, the new fiscal year for many of us. Next slide. This is the worksheet that I referred to earlier that Jim Luther helpfully developed. And along the column A, we see what the actual activity is. And then across the top, we see different types of costing concerns about it. And we hope to fill some of this in and be more kind of play with the columns and rows to make sure it makes sense. And we just included this slide to kind of remind people about what came out through our thought exchange when we tried to explore what some of the issues were. This is what people are trying to say. Agencies are trying to do different things. We need help with budgets. We need to support our investigators. First of all, what are actually the requirements? And I think that might be, these are just our emails in addition to the names which are on the earlier slides. These are the emails of the people that are, I guess, the leadership of the working group. And if you have any thoughts, please let us know, particularly if you have anything that you think would be an important outcome from this working group. Please share your thoughts with us. Next slide. Yeah,
Thank you.
That, right, Chrissy? Okay.
Yes, thanks, Judith. I appreciate it. So yes, we are not the only ones working in this space. There are other organizations that definitely have this on their agenda. So we want to be mindful and not duplicate efforts. So we have partnered in some instances with the Association of Research Libraries and the Council on Government Relations. So again, maximize the resources that we have, reduce the administrative burden to do this together. So along those lines, Melissa Korf, Jim Luther, and I had the opportunity to participate in a conference in March hosted by the Coalition for Networked Information. So that was an opportunity for us to kind of share the things that we're envisioning the work to be. And we've since had follow-up meetings with ARL and COGR. And you may remember from our January FDP meeting, we were joined virtually in a recorded session by Cynthia Hudson Vitale, and she shared her research with us. So she's with the Association of Research Libraries, and she has an NSF funded project working on this. So she has 6 research institutions represented here on this slide to participate in the study to support public access to data. So these are slides that we used at the CNI conference. And ARL's objectives were to examine funded research activities to make research data publicly accessible in 5 disciplines: environmental science, material science, psychology, biomedical sciences, and physics. They're also hoping to address some costing questions included from the institutional infrastructure survey. So they are conducting, ARL is conducting 2 surveys of their partner institutions. The first survey is targeted at VPRs, libraries, data centers. The other survey is towards faculty. And in both cases, the goal of the survey is to determine the resources that are available on these campuses. that survey hasn't gone out yet. It will go out this summer. And they will also host some focus groups. And since the CNI conference, we've had the opportunity to meet with ARL more recently. We've talked about the survey questions that they're including, gave some feedback. And I think we will continue to meet with ARL and COGR again, in just an effort to not duplicate efforts as we move towards January 2023. So I would like to hand it off to Melissa or Jim, if you're on the line, to talk about the activities that COGR is undertaking in this space.
Thanks, Christy. It doesn't look like Jim might have been able to join us for this session, but I know that he and potentially some others who are on the session are also heavily involved in the COGR working group, looking at the NIH policy for data management and sharing. So please, if you have something to add or I go astray, jump in and share. But there's so much to do in this space. I think that sometimes thinking about really wrapping our hands around data management and sharing and compliance with the NIH policy requirements is a big enough elephant. There's parts for all of us to share. And so we're trying to work pretty closely together between FDP, ARL, and then the COGR working group, whose charge is to develop expertise, share with other associations, and conduct other mission appropriate activities so that COGR can engage with NIH regarding this policy. So unlike FDP, who is not definitively not an advocacy organization, COGR is able to engage in that advocacy. So we want to make sure that COGR has the information that it needs in order to engage in that advocacy on our behalf. We want to be able to provide education and resources to COGR members. How can we make sure that member institutions are feeling ready and confident about their ability to comply with the new requirements? And then we also want to tease apart the cost of compliance, which may end up being a really interesting challenge. So in our conversations with some of the ARL folks and the survey that they're working on, they're really hoping to evaluate the cost specifically of making data publicly accessible. And we know that there are some things for data management that you just should do. Because it's good science, it's making sure that your protocols are rigorous and reproducible. And so how do you tease apart what data management and sharing activities are just good science versus, really necessary for public access? And then further, when we look at the NIH policy for data management and sharing, how do we tease apart what you should do because it's good science and it's part of your responsibility to your scientific community to share your data, to compliance with specifically the NIH policy, and how will we tease that apart and try to quantify? Next slide, Christy. So this is where I was hoping that Jim was going to chime in, because he had, I think, the brilliant idea to work on a briefing sheet. A document that we might be able to use at our institutions to initiate a conversation with leadership on why this new policy is important and warrants their attention. Or, what I'm hoping for at my own institution is that it's something that I might be able to tweak to initiate that conversation with faculty. Here's the high level points that you need to know. I'll maybe add to the bottom of it our institution specific resources. So I think that's going to be a document that's really useful to the community. And then also COGR has begun working on a readiness guide. I've listed here the first 5 chapters. So the first chapter will be kind of hand in hand with that briefing document. A policy matrix, roles and responsibilities at our institution. I know that is definitely one thing that my own institution is struggling with right now. There are a lot of stakeholders that need to be engaged in the process to really make sure that we're supporting our faculty through development of the plans, but then also compliance and implementation of those plans through the life cycle. And how do we make sure that we're engaging everyone and not stepping on each other's toes, but have clear roles and responsibilities. One of the really main goals that NIH has expressed with regards to this policy is that they really want to inspire a cultural shift to more focus and embracing data management and sharing best practices. And at sometimes I almost wish that it was a much simpler policy. Like NIH was just wanting to tell us to do X, Y, and Z, and we could do X, Y, and Z because cultural change is hard. So, how do we plan for and manage the cultural change that needs to accompany the policy in our institutions, and then starting to tease apart the costing issues. We've also been working on detailed analysis of NIH notices, engaging in advocacy, institutional support, and again, evaluating those costing implications. Next slide. So this is just a list of some resources and helpful links if you're interested in in ARL, that Association of Research Libraries, and learning more about that organization. There's a link to their website. Sort of still hot off the presses. I think it's maybe a month old. NIH released their scientific data sharing website that has a lot of really helpful resources, a side-by-side comparison between the policies that are in place currently and the policies that will go into effect in January, as well as some resources regarding institute, center, or office ICO specific policies or requirements, and a lot of other great resources. And I think the plan is that additional resources will be added there as we get closer to the effective date of the new policy. And then links to the various NIH guide notices that make up the policy and guidance that has been published. So the final policy for data management and sharing was published in one guide notice, and then there were 3 supplements that accompanied that policy publication. Supplemental information regarding elements of the NIH data management sharing plan, supplemental information regarding allowable costs, which I think is one particular guide notice that's going to be really meaningful for us to dive into for our FDP working group activities, and then supplemental information selecting a repository for data. Next slide. So, I mean, I thought it would be great to hear from everyone out there. What are your wishes for topics that this working group would tackle? Do you have any thoughts, concerns? You know, it's really great if we can hear from you all in these presentations as well, instead of just Christy, Judy, and I talking at you. So I think folks might be able to unmute themselves if anyone wanted to share anything, or if anyone had any questions or comments that they wanted to pop into the chat.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and move on. While you're thinking about all your questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. Melissa, if you could help me out by monitoring that, that'd be great. And along with the data sharing and management working group, which is obviously very important, and that's kicking off to a big start, there are still other initiatives that Finance, Audit, and Costing is working on and will continue to work on, namely the Treasury Offset Program. Tim Reuter from Stanford is working on that, and hopefully we'll have an update in September regarding those activities. There's still the letter of credit survey results forthcoming. And then if there are other areas that you feel that FDP can have an impact, I'd love to hear from you. We will kind of prioritize that data sharing and management working group since the policy implementation is fast approaching, but obviously there's a lot of other things that pop up in the finance audit and costing world. So please feel free to reach out with those questions and see where we can work together on that. I also was hoping to see Michelle Bowles. I don't know if she's on yet.
I'm on. I've been
Oh,
on for a
good.
minute.
Oh, good. Welcome, Michelle.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. And
I
I echo
will-
your sentiments in terms of making sure that if the group has any other areas that they would like for us to focus on that we haven't talked about, aside from the data sharing and management plans, let us know, because I think it's important for us to keep the momentum going in this finance and audit and costing committee, on top of maybe even looking at some demonstrations that we might want to participate in some of these areas. Did you want me to give the update?
Yeah,
Christy?
Michelle, if you don't mind, I think we're ready for you. I'm going to stop sharing.
So I'm just going to talk, and so that's just fine. There are a few updates that I wanted to let you guys know about. One, of course, is the fact that we no longer have to have you guys fill out the federal cash transaction report section of the FFR. That has been eliminated, and it seems like it's going very well. We have not gotten a lot of questions, not a lot of concerns in terms of standing that down. We actually are looking at how we are going to be able to better improve our FFR process as a result of that. And so as I was thinking, as I'm pushing back, I don't have any updates. But then, of course, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, Michelle, come on now, you're too bogged down. So what I will say is this. We have had a great deal of challenges with the centralization of the FFR going to PSC, now PMS. And so as a result, we've kind of looked at our internal processes, and we are actually moving the process center into the Office of Extramural Research, which will fall under my organization within the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration, OPRA. And the goal really will be to hire trained accountants to focus solely on the FFRs and making sure that those are processed, making sure that what the recipient submits, if there are changes that need to be made, we'll have dedicated staff to work with you guys so that you're not pinged hither and thither all over the place, working with OFM, Office of Financial Management, as well as the ICs. Now, at some point, you might have to work with the ICs, but the goal really will be to help provide that expertise in a single location. Do some of that homework and looking at what's going on behind the scenes for the recipients, as we had done in the past, but just moving that function within OPRA in order to have us maintain and keep a pulse on what, where the compliance areas are. So that should be coming within the next 6 months. We're looking at FY23 and having that in place. And I'm not sure that you'll see an immediate uptick in responses, but I promise you that we will definitely be providing a great deal of support to you guys and making sure that you guys have what you need. I will say also that a large part of what we've seen is that we had parent awards, and many of our COVID funds are attached to these parent awards. And so when you have administrative supplements and you have competitive revisions supplements, and they're attached and they are outside of the original project period end date for our parent awards, it threw us off a bit. And so what we're trying to do now is align our parent awards with the supplements. So either you might find that recipients are being told to, they will get a no-cost extension to blow out that parent award through the supplement. And then the other piece is that we had a mandate by HHS that said that we could not have reporting on the parent, which is something we used to do, right? We used to have you guys just submit FFRs or progress reports and just report on the in the section, the appropriate sections in the RPPR. And then for the FFR, you know, we didn't have a problem with those being attached. We had been given separate document numbers that we had to use for COVID. And as a result, I think what has happened is the reports are coming in and when the reconciliation takes place, they're reconciling on the parent and not necessarily the supplement. And so it's a mixed match, and we just really need to pull that all in, look at it holistically. And we've determined that there may be some times where we would like for our recipients just to report, especially when the project period has been extended. We just want you to report your FFR for the COVID funding after the extended period. And so that is something that I think we're trying to message as well. I know some of the institutes and centers have talked about it, but it might be a scenario where we need to issue a full guide notice so that at least one of two things. One, you guys can have the protection of the agency saying, report on the COVID funding at the end, very end of the project period. And then two, it gives our institutes and centers that support that they need too in case of an OIG audit. So that's one area that I was going to talk about. The other area.
Sorry, Michelle, just before you move on, I just wanted to mention that there was a question in the chat. Just wanting to confirm the update. Is it that FFRs will still be submitted via PMS, but in the future reviewed by Opera instead of? That
is correct.
Okay,
that
perfect.
is
Thank you so much.
Correct, Nate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they will still go through PMS. Now, what we are doing is where we find that there may be challenges with getting getting it through PMS if it's being rejected more than once. We are going to open up the ERA system in order to collect these anomalies. It won't be open for all, and we will be telling the recipient individually for each of those projects that they can submit through ERA Commons under the FFR module. But that will definitely be an anomaly. It will be rare, and we won't see that often unless we just really cannot get it through the payment management system. But Nate is correct. The FFRs are still submitted through PMS and will be reviewed by Opera staff versus the Office of Financial Management staff. So Tim is, thank you, Tim. You're thanking us for eliminating the quarterly report. However, NIH had provided information to institutions detailing that the funding by doc number that made reconciling the NIH authorized amounts what our institution had much easier. I'm not sure that I understand that question. So if you could unmute yourself and just kind of unpack that for me, Tim, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, with the quarterly statement that you used, the report that we had to do, you provided us huge downloads of information that allowed us to see the individual funding lines for each one of the document numbers. So we could see, hey, when you deobligated something, or when you move something from one segment A to segment B, and those kind of things, where you gave us by document number those 5 or 6 funding increments that you would give to us, or changes that you would make. And now that's a lot harder to get. And we would certainly like to continue to receive those big downloads that you used to send us, because that's what we use to do a lot of our reconciliations. I hope that makes sense.
I'm steadily talking. My apologies.
That's
So when we were asked about those downloads, it was a mixed bag. Some people say, yeah, not so helpful. Now I'm hearing you say that it is helpful. If you could provide me with at least just an example of what the kind of download you received, what I'll have my team do is look at what we are going to be doing and see how we can incorporate, if we need to incorporate that in, and whether or not that would be okay coming out of Opera, or whether it still needs to come out of the finance office, because we do have to have that level of separation of duties. And I want to make sure that we don't cross lines, but absolutely meet you all at your point of need where it comes to having those downloads and making that readily accessible to you if it's helpful. Because I think the goal really was to always streamline and eliminate and reduce burden. And if we're not giving you something that we once did, it would be helpful for me to know what that is and what that looks like.
Absolutely. I'll send you copies of what they were. I won't send you the whole document. I'll just send you cutouts from it. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. So we talked about that. One of the things I was going to just bring up today as well, a couple of things. Again, my co-chairs, they were like, you got something to say. I'm like, I don't have anything to say, but I do. So one of the things, the other thing that I wanted to bring up with you guys today is the fact that NIH is continuing to work really closely with NSF and NSTC and some of the other agencies like DOE and DOD to develop a harmonized other support biosketch disclosure form, as well as instructions, what we call the Uber instructions and forms. But until we are able to get to that place where we finalize those developments, we gave a report out today a little bit about disclosures and talked about the fact that, you know, NIH and NSF will be having these optional ORCID ID numbers for all forms. We are going to be absolutely aligning our table, our disclosure table with NSF's. We've had some areas where there was a kind of a mismatch. As we talked about today earlier, there was a wonderful opportunity, just that perfect storm for Jean Feldman at NSF to develop her documents while we were going through the NSPM 33. NIH we developed our documents prior to NSPM 33, and we will and are updating some of those changes. But the bottom line is that the disclosure tables will probably change, outlining those things that are no longer but that is not required to be disclosed. So that's really clear to our recipients. We have aligned ourselves 100% with NSF in the disclosure table, with the exception of the financial conflict of interest, which is our regulation, and NSF doesn't have the same regulation, thank goodness. But for the most part, we will be in sync with one another. And you can rest assured that those agencies that adopt the Uber forms and Uber instructions, as well as the disclosure requirements table, you will definitely see a great deal of harmonization there. We got a lot of good questions today, at least for NIH. We got a lot of good questions about ICs asking for different information. And so it was really helpful for me to see the questions and take those down and send to my staff and say, we got to get these internal FAQs together. And I'm going to be meeting with the grants management officials to talk to them about what the requirements are and to find out whether or not the additional questions are just questions that they need to ask because they have additional questions, or if they think that if they're interpreting the policy and the disclosure requirements very differently from what we intended. So this was, like having that discussion today before here was really enlightening. And I'm excited that we can at least address it. I think my staff is probably not happy because I sent them like a litany of questions that all of our colleagues at FDP were asking, but I think for the most part, we need to go ahead and make sure that our internal policies and our internal FAQs and practices are just as clear, or maybe even clearer than the ones that you guys have for the external use. So please keep in mind that we are working to develop this. We've got a lot of steam, and we're doing really good in terms of wading through comments and making sure that we are in lock and step with OSTP, and making sure that OSTP is trusting that both NIH and NSF are working together and making sure that we don't get out ahead of them. So a large part of what we are trying to do is allow OSTP to make the really big announcements, but us telling you guys that we are working. And when I tell you, like Jean and I spend 2 and 3 hours a day. Like last week we did it twice. It was like 6 hours in total. And anybody that knows my schedule knows that's crazy. And I have to bump meetings and all that kind of stuff. So I just say that we are really working to make sure that we do right by the institutions and by our recipients. So, and by OSTP, of course.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. We definitely felt the harmonization, and I can only imagine trying to carve out that kind of time between you and Jean. So thank you.
Now, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is the data sharing and management plans.
Good.
We have someone from NIH that's on, Cherno Berry is on the group, but we're going to add more folks to the group. And I wanted us to be able to start thinking about whether or not we would be interested in doing some pilots and demonstrations. We have a tool that is being developed, and we want to enter into discussions with this group to think about piloting the tool and doing a demo on the tool and working with us. So we will be reaching out to you. I probably will be reaching out to you, Jim. And what was our colleague's name that gave the presentation earlier?
Judith Ryan.
Judy.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll be reaching out to make sure that we touch base with you guys to talk about the pilot and what we're thinking. But I also think that there's a need for us to do other types of pilots, not just for the collections part, but even the costing part. So we'll probably reach out within the next couple of weeks to get a meeting on the books just to talk about what that might look like, so that we can bring, you and I and Cindy can bring this back to our group here and see what the interest is. So that's all I have.
That's very exciting, Michelle. Thank you. We did have a question come in about FFRs. Does NIH have a timeline on establishing a plan to coordinate the process for reopening closed PMS accounts? We've had some difficulty getting to the right place since GMS, PMS, and OFM have bounced us around, saying that the other party is responsible. So specifically on closed.
So we had some challenges with the closed accounts as well. And one of the things we're trying to do is tease out those accounts and work with PMS to see what we need to do. So Opera will be working with PMS to see what needs to happen. I don't think OFM is the right place for that question. I think it is definitely square within PMS and Opera. We just need to figure out what we need to do to try to open these accounts. I thought for some reason that those were kind of taking care of themselves, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
They can be a bit challenging, I can say from experience. Let's see, we had another question come in the studies of cost for the additional requirements. Please make sure that at least one representative from an ERI is involved in the work. When the description of the relationship with the Library Association went by, I believe I heard that those involved were 6 research universities. And yes, that is something we in the working group are very mindful of, that we need to make sure that we are able to represent the larger FDP community, not just those research institutions or even those of us participating in the working group, but it really does need to be compatible to all. Let's see, our institution, so Michelle, this is another question. Our institution still has a large discrepancy. We need to figure out with the closure of the pooled account, and we can't get any traction on a response. Do you have a recommendation on a person or office to reach out to?
So thanks for your question, Liz. For some reason, I thought we did a data call, and we thought we had we didn't have many pooled accounts, but maybe this is one that is still open. Let me, what institution is it? does it show where Liz is from?
I'm at Oregon Health Science University, and it is closed. You're right, and that's part of the problem. It's closed and over, and nobody, we can't get an answer from anyone.
I think it's because I think the challenge is because they're not going to be able to open it back up unless we really need to look at this, because I think PMS is worried about an audit finding. So let us just work with them to see what we can do to get this fixed. There has been no movement on those areas, and we talked about that with them. It may be a scenario where those have to come in through the ERA FFR module, and we fix it that way. To be quite honest with you, that might be one of the anomalies that we need to consider, Liz.
Okay.
So I mean, that's just me brainstorming, and
Yeah.
that's what I would think. But I'm going to ask folks and let them know what I think, and then they can tell me if I'm crazy or not. But we got to do something.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your help.
All right, does anybody else have questions they'd like to unmute or pop in the chat? Okay. So I think come September at our next meeting, I think we're going to have a lot of updates to share. It sounds like Michelle will have some more updates. We'll definitely have working group updates as far as data sharing and management working group. So there's a lot of activities that will happen between now and September. And if any of these are things that you're interested in, or if there's things that you are interested in we didn't talk about, please feel free to reach out. The contact information will be in the slide deck when it gets posted. So love to hear from you and love to work through some of these things together. So Michelle, do you have any final comments?
No, the only comment that I have is that I'm really looking forward to us really getting our teeth and cutting into this data sharing and management stuff. But I do encourage our members to think about other areas that we might want to concentrate on. And I actually would like for us to be thinking about how we can better work with the institutions as it relates to these FFRs. So someone, Liz, anybody that wants to kind of start a group to help us kind of think through that process, so that as we stand up our process that we know will impact the recipients, let's have some ideas about that together. I don't know, maybe Nate might want to do it. He's the FFR guru. So maybe Nate or Liz or somebody, whoever, I just think we need to do it. If ARPA is going to do it, it needs to work for the recipients, and we need to understand where our lines of demarcation are so that we can push off the finance and accounting pieces to OFM, but really take care of the core processing and reconciliation of them, and working with the institutions and the ICs, because that's the only way this is going to work.
Absolutely. Liz loved your idea. So
Good.
And yes, Nate, I think you were just voluntold. So thank you. Let's see, one more question came in. Is anyone thinking of increasing the amount of modular grants?
We talked about that for a while, and we've not been able to come to any final decisions about that. It has been an ongoing, it stops and starts annually. But there was some talk about it. I think it was earlier in the fiscal year, and then it was some last year, and we just hadn't come to that threshold, because we do have that 500,000 K threshold, where if the application comes in, it has to be pre-approved or prior approved by the IC. So the question was, how do we do that, right? If we move it up and it's not at 500K, it still has to be approved anyway. So there was some discussion, I will say, and we just didn't get to a place where we agreed on anything. And so many other things came up, like data sharing and management, and the FFRs and reconciliation saga, that it just really just overtook everything. And Melissa says, and I could increase the $500,000 cap as well. That is true. Not way above my pay grade or my senior status. So
Well, thank you for commenting that it has at least been considered. So thank you for that. Okay, if there's no additional questions, please feel free to reach out offline and we can work through these things directly with Michelle and Cindy. And I hope to see everyone tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern for the NSF OIG session on promising practices for NSF award management. This will conclude the finance audit and costing session, and this will also conclude the FDP meeting for today. So see
Thank
everyone
you.
tomorrow. Thanks, Michelle.
thank you so much. Take care. All right, Mark, I hear you. I'm adding your name